All right. Welcome, everyone, to Kevin Towle Reads. My guest, my esteemed colleague and buddy in this read, Austyn from Outer World Media. Austyn, how are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. How about yourself, Kevin?
Oh, living the dream, buddy. I'm excited to be here to talk about this book because, uh, I'm just going to let the cat out of the bag. I enjoyed the heck out of it. So, what about you?
I'm not going to lie, and I don't know if this is spoiling everything ahead of time or anything like that. And I'm just going to tell you up front, as a side note, I was talking with Jay earlier today, and I asked him, "Do you have any advice for the live stream?" And his response was, "Don't wave your hands as much as you normally do." So if you see me waving my hands, it's for Jay. It's for you know who you are. Yeah, no, it's for
No.
Jay. No, I enjoyed the book. I did. I'm not gonna lie. And again, I think this might be spoiling things as far as whether we're gonna say we like at the end or not. This is four books now that I've read by Joe Hill, and I'm not gonna lie, they get better and better. And I think, in all honesty, this is definitely up there to be my favorite one by him that I've read.
Yeah, I have read. This will be well. I've read. So let's dive right in here. So I've read A Heart Shaped Box. That was the first book I read from him. Fantastic horror
Oh yeah.
ghost story. Horns, which I thought was good. It wasn't as I didn't like it as much as Heart Shaped Box, but I liked it. And then I've read a bunch of his short stories. I've read everything in Strange Weather, and I've read some of his 20th. No, not 20th century. Yes, 20th Century's Ghost. And there's another collection, Full Throttle. I've read a few of those stories. So I've read two novels now, King Sorrow being the third novel, and a handful of short stories, and I like them. I've always attributed Joe Hill, as everyone knows, he's Stephen King's oldest of son. I've attributed him as a modern day Stephen King. Um, I've always said that where Stephen King writes slice of life and characters from the 60s and 70s really, really well. I think Joe writes characters and kids from like the 80s and 90s and 2000 really, really well. So, but yeah, let's dive right in and talk about this book. So, if you are just jumping on here, we probably won't talk about spoilers until later, but we'll give you some high level kind of information here and then give you kind of an overarching summary of this book. Sound good, Austin?
That sounds fine with me.
So, obviously, the title is King Sorrow, written by Joe Hill, aka Joseph King, one of three of Stephen King's kids. Publication date was October 21st, 2025. As uh, Austin and I both kind of chuckled when we decided to do this. This is a chunker, almost 900 pages. And this is the first novel that Hill has written since 2016, The Fireman. Did you read The Fireman?
I didn't. So that's the thing. In order that I read them, I read Heart Shaped Box, which I absolutely loved it. Then I picked up Horns, which I loved as well.
Yep.
Then I picked up Nosferatu. Read that one. I liked it. Wasn't my favorite, but I liked it. I did not read any of his short story collection or anything like that. And I forgot about the Fireman. And the
Yeah.
reason being is because everybody said, "Oh, it's his take on the stand. It's
Yep.
no not worth reading, blah blah blah," which kind of is. And so I pushed it out of my mind, and that's when I started hearing about this book. Was it's his take on it, it's this and that's that. And obviously we'll get into that a little bit more. Um but no, I didn't read it. But I actually, after finishing this, I think I finished this on like a Tuesday. I went the next day to my local used bookstore, and they had The Fireman. And I picked it up, and I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie, I got one book I'm finishing right now, and then I'm probably gonna pick that up just from
Yeah.
how much I enjoyed this. But I
Yeah.
definitely have to agree with you. His writing style, he definitely captures the spirit of the '90s, 2000s kids, definitely.
Yeah, The Fireman was one of those weird books. I read the first probably 200 pages of The Fireman, and it was one of those books like I was enjoying it, but I wasn't like over the moon about it, and I got sidetracked, and I just never. And then when I tried to come back to it like a couple weeks later, I was like, yeah, I kind of missed where I was at and the kind of the plot, and I was like, I don't really want to start over, so I'm like, I'll just shelve it for now. But I remember like what you just said, it is kind of his dystopian apocalyptic Stand kind of esque telling. And I do remember liking the female character, one of the main protagonists. I liked her a lot in the story. So, hey, Brian, what's going on? Brian's in the house.
What's going on, Brian?
And so, okay, so this is the first book that Hill's written since The Fireman, which was 2016. I don't know if you caught any of the kind of hoopla that was going around about the Joe Hill's new book, but obviously the 9-year gap was a big thing that was talked about in some of the interviews. Because after I read it, I watched some of the interviews from Hill kind of promoting this. And one of the things that he talked about was now that he is 50 years old, he was talking about, my dad, Stephen King, writes, at least a book a year and has for several years. He has made kind of the personal challenge Joe Hill has that he wants to write a book a year for every year of the decade that is 50s. So that's his plan, is to publish a book every year in the next 10 years. So that should be interesting because I like his writing quite a bit.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was actually did a little bit of research myself earlier and was watching, interview that he was doing. I forget who it was that he was talking to, or what news station it was. But kind of going back real quick, because you said, was it 2016 was the last
Yep.
time he? So if you read, I know you were reading on Kindle and you had the Audible version. But if you go to the back of the book, he gives his thanks to everybody. He talks about how he actually had the draft. He had this written out and first draft or whatever, like 2024. And so he talks about how he was hesitant to, put it out, and he gave it to obviously his dad to read, his mother, I guess. And I actually in the interview read that, and in this he actually talks about his editor, his UK editor, and I kind of thought it was a little strange that he gave such a big shout out to his UK editor. But I actually found out while watching that interview that he actually married her back in 2018. And so he talks about, in the interview, how his first book, Heart Shaped Box, was such a huge success. Sorry, it's hard to speak. And so the person doing the interview said, well, how did you cope with having such success from, your first book? And he said, well, I didn't put King as my last name because I didn't want anybody to just sell the book or publish the book because of my name. So he took,
Right.
The approach that his dad did with the Richard Bachman books, obviously, and just wanted to prove himself. And so he talks about how he got a divorce, he got depressed. He essentially did what his dad did back in, like the 80s when he wrote Cujo, where he was just on drugs and alcohol and all this stuff. It kind of went through the same things that his dad did, and talks about how, he finally broke down and he ended up going to see a therapist. He got on some anxiety medication and whatnot, which led him to actually get married to his UK publisher back in 2018. And they had a couple twins back in 2022, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was talking about how, he's been so focused on family life that he forgot to focus on writing for his fans because, obviously huge gap there. And just kind of hearing that interview made me respect him even more, again, just because of, he acknowledged his demons. He kind of has overcome them, if you will. And he talks about, how he got the inspiration for writing this book and just, all over the place on his life and that gap that he had because he really wasn't in the limelight, if you will. He wasn't on the forefront. He kind of disappeared and whatnot. And so he kind of filled everybody in. And I'm not going to lie, after hearing all that stuff, it really made me enjoy this book even more after finishing it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really interesting that you caught some of that backstory because I had written some of that down as well. So that's perfect. His life has a kind of similar trajectory that his dad had as well. And you can definitely sense, this book especially, and I've watched a few other booktubers kind of take on this when they were giving their light spoiler and spoiler reviews of this. There's a heavy influence to King and King's works here, and we'll get into that for sure because, especially if you're a fan of The Dark Tower, there's a lot to take in. So with that being said, genre, this is definitely, it could fit into a lot of different genres, but it's mainly horror, fantasy, thriller. Some people say that this is kind of dark academia We have an occult, we have kind of dragon mythological, myth elements here as well. But let's talk about the premise. I'm going to give you and the viewers kind of a high level overview of the premise. I don't want to get into spoilers just yet. So this is kind of vague, but it should give you the idea if you haven't heard about this book. So the book's premise really, it focuses around one in particular student or younger kid around the college age named Arthur Oakes. He's a student at Rackham College in Maine. He's kind of coerced by some local criminals. There's a young lady whose mom is in prison and her boyfriend, and they kind of twist his arm in a kind of unique way because they realize that he works at Rackham College, and he works in the library, and the library has a nice collection of rare books that they think they kind of twist his arm to make some side money. So Arthur turns into his group of friends. He has 5 other friends, and he finally begrudgingly turns to them for some help. And together they kind of use a very dangerous ritual involving a famous skin-bound journal from someone to summon a dragon entity called King Sorrow from a place called the Long Dark. They make a bargain with King Sorrow, who will serve them and kill any tormentors that they have. But in return, King Sorrow demands a regular human sacrifice each year around Easter. If they fail to present King Sorrow with a sacrifice, they will have to choose one of themselves to become the sacrifice. So the story spans 4 decades where the kids in the friend group are in their college years all the way into their adult lives, and we get to see what effects this has on their lives, their friendship, corruption, actually naming some people that most of us are accustomed to in our own real life history. And it kind of interweaves all that in kind of this really interesting tale. Anything you wanted to add to that, Austyn?
No, you covered just about everything without really doing any spoilers. I mean, I don't think it's anything to really add necessarily to the story as far as that goes. But what I'll say, as far as my personal opinion with describing the story, I'm a huge Joe Hill fan, and I was a little hilarious to get into this because the description sounded a little, I don't want to say far fetched, but a little mixed genre to me, which I'm not somebody who necessarily cares about genres, but it sounded a little strange. Like, how is he going to pull it off? And what I will say is, as strange as it sounds, if it sounds really strange to you, he pulls it off. I promise. Yeah, no, this definitely. And you talked about, kind of horror fantasy, Dark Tower references and all this. And I've not read this book. I have not read a lot of Stephen King books by any means. I'm working on that currently. What I will say is this kind of sounded a little bit in the vein, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, of like the Talisman, kind of like a fantasy horror isk, if you will. So I think that might also kind of be a little nod to his dad. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of, if you're looking for a vein to, or book to put this with, I would kind of say it kind of sounds a little bit like that.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of actually different little nods, and not only to his dad here, but there's also nods to some other things as well. And definitely want to talk about that. So I definitely think you're on the right path there for sure. Talisman, yeah, definitely one of my most favorite underrated Stephen King books. What's up, Bing Lamb?
What's going on, Bing?
So now that you guys have kind of the summary, I want to talk about some of the key characters, and I'm just going to lightly touch on these, and then Austyn, you can kind of keep me honest here. So I mentioned Arthur Oakes. He's kind of central to the story. I mean, he's the one where we get a lot of what this is about. How does this dragon entity come from this other place, which is heavily influenced? The Long Dark, to me, and I don't really want to get into the Stephen King references and Easter eggs just yet, but
Yeah.
the Long Dark is really, to me, it's kind of like the Prim of the Dark Tower. It's kind of like Midworld. It's kind of like, where Pennywise, that kind of, it's definitely in that mythos. And that's not even like me kind of stretching it. It really is definitely sounds like that. But this whole kind of plot revolves and starts around Arthur Oakes. Now, his other kind of cohorts, we have Gwen, and so you have Arthur and Gwen, and they have a romantic relationship, and that romantic relationship gets stretched when King Sorrow is brought forth, and they make this pact with this dragon entity. But you have an Arthur and you have a Gwen, so you have Arthurian kind of legend type stuff going on as well. Obviously, we're talking about a dragon, and at several points during the story, Hill references the fact that we're talking about dragon, kind of like Smog in The Hobbit. And so you have references to Tolkien here, obviously. You have other kind of supporting characters in this kind of friend group, which heavily reminds me of the Losers Club. So you have Arthur, Gwen, Colin, Allie or Allison, and then you have Donna and Donovan, everyone calls Van, that are twins. And so those are your key kind of six people. And so throughout the story, you get somewhat their lives and intertwined and how it works. But just to give you a high level overview, Arthur is kind of this college student whose father was denied professor kind of tenure at a college abroad in England. But he always has plans to go and do his, graduate work there. And so he is kind of like this monkish kind of individual, always kind of seeing everything neutral. Gwen, his kind of romantic relationship, she is morally grounded. She's smart. She's kind of level headed. She's definitely a mother hen kind of caregiver type. And so we have her. Colin, he is the wealthy friend of the group. He's the one who suggests summoning the dragon. His grandfather, he has lived a very interesting life, and he helps the government, and they're wealthy. And so Colin heavily reminded me of kind of like your Zuckerberg, your startup tech guy kind of, he's always trying to find an angle with things. Allison, she is kind of the easy manipulated. She's definitely sexually confused individual of the group. She has obviously feelings for Van, one of the twins, but she also has feelings towards Van's sister, Donna, as well. So they have that dynamic that's going on. And then Donna and Donovan, I don't know what you thought about Van, but Van seemed like to be like the screw up. He's the drug kind of ridden one. Donna is the
Definitely.
power hungry, kind of wants to be in the limelight all the time, wants adoration from people. So you have a very unique kind of core cast of characters. Anything I missed there?
No, I think you covered it perfectly. Like you said, this kind of reminds you of the Losers Club. I've tried reading, I think if you followed my channel for any point in time, I've tried to read it probably about 4 or 5 times. I get so far into it and just stop for whatever reason. Don't know why, and I need to rectify that. But what I will say, as far as the group dynamic, it definitely reminds me of that. But I don't know how focused Hill was when he was trying to come up with this friend group, but this really seems like a group of kids, if you will, or people that you would find at any town, any city, anything like that. There is somebody that is relatable, at least in this group, one way or another. You might
Sure.
find, 2 or 3 characters relatable to a certain degree. What I will say is, if Arthur was an actual person, I definitely would be friends with him.
Yeah.
I feel like that's going to be the general consensus for everybody when they read this book. But yeah, definitely, there's like King, and again, I feel bad for using this and comparing Hill and his dad, but it's hard not to do. Um, Joe Hill's kind of just look at this group and examining each character as the story goes on, even characters you don't really like in this book, you start to delve in and realize and really see that this is like any town, like I said, that you would come across. There's this group of people, this group. So it's again very, very down to earth. Not, oh well, this person wouldn't, there'd never be anybody like this. No, it really is a grounded story, even though there's dragons and Arthurian legends and stuff like that in this. Definitely a grounded character driven story in my opinion. Now what I will say also, he does make quite a few nods to Tolkien's, universe, Middle Earth, which I love. I'm a huge Tolkien
Yeah.
fan. I'm a huge Middle Earth nerd, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
So I remember texting you, I believe, that I was trying to keep a reference of every pop culture or reference or J.R.R. Tolkien reference, and I lost count of the Tolkien references. In all
Yeah.
honesty,
Yep.
about a eighth of the way through the book, I lost count of it. So if you're somebody who likes that, you're definitely going to get that in this book.
For sure. For sure. Scott, hi, Kevin. I'm new to your channel. Is Joe Hill related to Jonah Hill? No, not even
I'd love to see
close.
that dynamic, though. I'm not going to lie. Joe Hill and Jonah Hill, that's something I would pay to see on screen.
Yeah. Yeah. Scott, I got this comment earlier on one of my posts from a Wendy Torrance that said that something about bubbles. I don't know what that was about, but anyways, you probably should check out one of my comments. Brian, the Crustic, guess the types to make the pact in the first place wouldn't select a victim among themselves and be done with it instead of piling up corpses. Would have shortened up the book, though. That's interesting. I don't know what you thought about some of the people, so every time they come together, Colin is kind of like the tech guy, so he's keeping everyone he's like, hey, let's create a spreadsheet, let's do some research and think about who so every Easter the six rotate. So it's one time it's Austyn's time, one time it's my time, every year. And so they had this spreadsheet and they did some kind of research and they would kind of stack rank, who is the person that Austyn chooses this year and whatnot. And there was a couple years, I believe, and keep me honest, Austyn, that they deferred to someone else because, like, I don't have anything. I haven't heard anything. And it was all kind of like, who's the worst of the worst that we want this guy to go because it'll help humanity type thing. And that's how they played it originally. And so they were like, hey, what about this guy named Saddam Hussein? Or what about this guy named bin Laden? And so, and they made some references to 9/11, when that happened, and like, we should have picked this guy because then this happened type thing, which all tied it into kind of like time stamping the story, which I thought was a really interesting dynamic.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think that's you could probably niche this in like a alternative history, kind of like I think it's Larry Turtledove. I could be mistaken. I know Dustin Neely has read some books, alternative history. I think if you're somebody who really wants to, you could probably put this in that subgenre again, just because of that. But it definitely helped with the time stamping of, okay, we're four, fast forward this many years, and he does give you at the beginning of a chapter when he jumps characters, a year, but you can give somebody a year. You don't know what time it is where, if he says, okay, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a part where it's just after 9/11 happens and they're talking
Mm-hmm.
about this. So you kind of get a general idea. Okay, they're in this part of the country, this right after this happened in September, October, what have you. Kind of gives you an idea. You can paint in your head of, okay, this is kind of the scenery around what we're looking at and whatnot. And I'm not going to lie. You're probably going to hear me say this a lot in this live stream. I really did enjoy that, him throwing that stuff in there. And it really led to, I think, a deeper dive into the characters because,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, there's a couple times where they had bin Laden at the top of their list like two or three times, and they, for whatever reason, they passed on him because they
Yep.
didn't think he was a big threat. And
Yep.
then you see the remorse because they feel bad enough that they're having to do this, and then this other thing happens that they regret instantly. Like, why did we not pick this guy? So you definitely get sympathy for all the characters, even as terrible things are happening or to them or by one another, what have you. Whoever the character is, you feel bad for each of them in that situation.
Yeah. And another thing that's kind of goes along with that I don't think spoils anything really is that when the group made the pact, they all have this serpent thing that they can touch their chest and call King Sorrow to them. And so that actually happens. And one of my favorite parts of this book was when King Sorrow would come. And so that was always interesting. And there were some really cool sections when he comes. Obviously, the climax of the book involves him, but yeah, when he comes, he's not a scalpel. It's not like when he takes out someone or he does their bidding that he does it in a very surgical manner. He is a bomb that comes into play. And so I liked that. And I like the fact that as he is used and pulled from the long dark to do their bidding, whether it's based on them touching this serpent tattoo thing or it's Easter, the government has to get involved in some manner to kind of what's going on. We need to figure this out, who's involved, and which also comes into play and is intertwined in the story, which I thought was really interesting as well. So we've talked about the key six people, but there's also some other people we need to talk about as well. And it kind of ties into how this thing starts. So Arthur Oakes is our main person plus his friends. And so how he gets coerced is he bumps into the people called the Nyswanders. And so Daphne Nyswander is this evil, grudge carrying lady who is locked up in a correctional facility and she's awaiting parole. Um, why Arthur is there is his mother, who is a ex-pastor, I believe, is in the actual prison based on the fact that she did kind of a she was doing kind of a taking a stance against something and a police officer was accidentally killed and she stayed behind in the scene when this happened and while others fled and when she was doing a protest and she got convicted. And so Arthur is going to meet his mom. You know, he does routine visits to the prison, and he happens in kind of bumping into these people in a roundabout way, and that's how he gets coerced. So the Nyswanders play an interesting role at the beginning of the story because one, it's what evolves into them doing this ritual and calling King Sorrow forth. But it's also because the Nyswanders, the old lady Nyswander, holds a grudge throughout the story and comes into play down later in the story. So you have Daphne Nyswander, who is the mom. You have Jane Nyswander, who is kind of like the drug dealer, basically a chip off her mom's old block and kind of calls all the shots. Her boyfriend, Ronnie Volpe, is this kind of guy that goes along and does whatever Jane says and kind of wants to do what whatever makes her happy as long as he's living the life he wants to live. But what was the really kind of the heartwarming and interesting dynamic for the Nyswanders and the key six kids is Tanya Nyswander, because she becomes involved in their lives because Jane kind of basically in a roundabout way pimps her out to people that Jane sells drugs to. And so Tanya becomes involved in that manner, but plays an integral role in the story as one of the key, with the key six people dealing with King Sorrow. So I think that's interesting to point out because not only is it about these six individuals, you also have these antagonists that are involved as well, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if you've seen the movie Billy Madison. You know where he goes to school and he deals with the O'Doyles. That's what I first thought when I read them. I was like, oh, this is gonna be like the O'Doyles. Everybody knows who they are,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, definitely. Tanya was definitely a character that, again, as the story goes on, she becomes more prevalent. And I don't feel like that's spoiling it for anybody. I'm not gonna lie. And again, try not to spoil anything. And I'm not sure when or if we're going to get into where we had issues, but the big couple issues that I had were kind of at the beginning of the story. But like you said, as the story goes on, this family, you realize how despicable they are. And you think to the fullest, and as the story keeps going on, Tanya will tell you a little bit. Well, I had to do this because of this and my sister, and it really, really, it's just unfortunate for somebody to be in that situation because that's what they're, born into. So you couldn't help but at least find yourself cheering for Tanya, whatever, as the story goes on. As far as that goes. Now, as far as Arthur's mom being in this all women's prison, if I'm not mistaken, or
Yep.
jail, whatever you want to call it. It's never fully explained up until I think probably like the last eighth of the
Yep.
book, why she's there. So you're
Yep.
kind of, at least me, I was kind of scratching my head like, why is this lady who was a preacher, in this situation? Obviously Arthur's dad was somebody who was trying to work at this university but couldn't, like, it just didn't make any sense. But
Right.
again, as the story went on and you found out the reason why, you really couldn't help but feel for her and Arthur and everybody in the situation, because this small, and I don't want to downplay it, but because of this one situation of somebody trying to do something, just had this huge effect. Again, cause and effect, just this huge effect on not only, you know, her, but her son's friends, the entire world, if you will.
Hmm.
And that's I think one of the things you realize as the story goes on is one little cause has a huge effect
Yeah.
on this whole world, because he really is covering the whole world, even though he's focusing on, this group of characters and whatnot. And I will say as well, the mother that's in prison, not Arthur's, but I can't for the life of me remember what her name is. But in all honesty, after reading this book, I think I would put her up there as one of, I really would put her up there with one of King's like most villainous characters, at least in my opinion, from what I've
Yeah.
read.
Yeah. 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 Daphne, she's pretty evil. Yeah, for sure. Bing Lamb, I am an alternative history fan, love Harry Turtle Dove, but not so much a horror fan. It's one of my least favorite genres. Could I get something out of this book? I admit this book isn't on my radar. I think so. I do. I think this probably will go down as probably one of Hill's best books. Um, this there's a lot of different kind of feels to this. It pulls from Arthurian, it pulls from kind of the Dark Tower, it pulls from the Hobbit. There's a lot that you could like about this. And if you like character stories that have a decent arc over decades, this definitely has it. Yeah, for sure. Hayden Reed is here. O'Doyle rules.
Oh, it's great to see him in the comments as well as Bing. I think, and I will say, I think Bing will enjoy this. I think, in all honesty, if you're somebody, you don't really enjoy horror, you don't really like fantasy, you don't really like alternative history, but you like this or that, I really think this is a genre bending book. I think anybody and everybody could find something in this book that they enjoy. Obviously Joe Hill, you're associated with his dad, Stephen. Um, I honestly, I don't even know if this is necessarily horror, in my opinion. Like I said, it definitely blends a lot of genres. So I think, everybody can enjoy this, as far as that goes. I'd love to get Bing's, what they think of this book, if you will.
Yeah. So Brian's like, the book sounds interesting, so I'm going to bail before learning too much. Have a good Sunday, everyone. Take care, Brian.
Brian, let us know what you think later on when you finish the book, because I really can't wait to hear what everybody thinks of this book. That's how much I enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, let's talk about some kind of major plot points. So, we're going to start to delve into some spoiler related content. I don't think it'll be heavy spoilers, but we're definitely going to be talking about some things that happen that you may or may not want to know if you do plan on reading this. So you've been warned, but I hope you stick around and check this out. So, um, major plot points. Obviously, you have Arthur. He's getting coerced. He needs to do something. They end up Austyn, if I remember correctly, they start up this, okay, you need to work off a debt for us, otherwise my mom's going to shank your mom while she's in prison, or she's not going to see parole, or we're going to try to plant something, which I think they end up doing, I believe, as well, trying to deny her parole type thing. And so they have a number in mind, which Arthur realizes he's going to have to steal some pretty rare books to get enough money, because he's not only stealing the books, but he's giving them to Jane Nicewinder, who is fencing, is acting like a fence, who's giving him to these rare book dealers in the city. And they're turning around and selling them for, a 10 cents on the dollar type to try, because they're hot, trying to get rid of them. And so it's going to take a long time. And so that's kind of how this all comes. And Arthur realizes after he tells his friends about, his plight, and they see what's going on and how it's affecting him, they're asking questions like, "What's wrong with you?" And that's when they realize, "Oh, let's all do the occult thing, and let's see if we can get drunk, and let's call a dragon to our need here." And so that's how that all comes to pass. Well, the other kind of thing is once they make the pact with King Sorrow, they realize, he has some things that he wants as well, and so every Easter they have to come up with a sacrifice. As they go out through their lives, though, as they grow up and they're still having to come and meet at Colin's place to make the sacrifice or name the name that they're going to give to King Sorrow, they start to realize they're never really going to be out from under King Sorrow's kind of influence. And so some of the pact is okay with that. They feel like, hey, we're doing a good thing. We're telling King Sorrow to off murk people that are bad people. And so they can sleep at night with that. Some of them are like, hey, is that really, how this should work in a society and whatnot? Mainly Gwen and Arthur that have kind of a conscience. They have a kind of a an inner battle with their own, kind of is this right? Their morals, their ethics. And so we have this kind of that creates some friction. Then we have this government. The government starts to realize, hey, someone is doing something in a very profound way. As I mentioned earlier, King Sorrow doesn't come in like a scalpel. He is a huge bomb that goes off. And so that's what ends up happening. And so the government's like, hey, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about the, how are we going to control this, contain this? And then there's an element that reminds me heavily of Firestarter that happens because we have the capture of the McBrides, Van and Donna, that happen as well. And so that happens. And so there's a lot of different elements that kind of major plot points. And then you have this, as they're conflicted, the key six people, we have, hey, what are we going to do? How are things going to work? Who's going to continue on with this? Who wants to do something about King Sorrow once and for all? How do we get out from under this? And there's definitely kind of a, I guess, rift in the core group that happens. And so we have some that want to figure out how we can get rid of him. How do we do this? There's some people that think, hey, let's riddle him, kind of like Smog, in the Underdark with Bilbo and riddling and that kind of thing. And so that was a theme that was in there. And then you have people like Arthur, like, hey, I think we can figure this out. Yeah. And then you have a lot of backstabbing that happens. And then you have a major conflict. Who's going to stand up? Who's going to do the right thing? How do we deal with this demon, this dragon that happens type thing? And so those are the major plot points that happen. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it very, very well. I will say, and as reading the book, and again, have not read as much Stephen King as I'd like to admit, um, the fact that you also thought that maybe this might have been the shop, at least in my opinion,
Yeah.
it definitely seemed like the shop from Firestarter.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen my review of that, go watch it because, the part that I really didn't like in Firestarter was when, the character was in a containment facility, if you will. A couple things I would like to just also kind of touch on. We talked earlier about references, and I can't believe I forgot to mention this. The book being bound in, whatever they described it as flesh made me think of the Necronomicon from the
Yeah.
Evil Dead, in all honesty. So that's kind of, especially when, you open it, you read this part and it talks kind of, and it really does sound like the Necronomicon. The other thing I wanted to point out as well, you touched on how, they have to essentially sacrifice somebody on or by Easter, which I thought was very, very, you know, uh, just symbolic. The fact that, this dragon essentially is like a demon and it's Easter,
Yeah.
Christ's resurrection and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I thought that's very symbolic, as you read this, and I couldn't help but think, okay, Joe kind of had to have set this as that day just to kind of represent in this book. It really is good versus evil. There's backstabbing. There's people that one thing I will say, and I don't think it's super spoilerly or anything like that. And again, English is hard. Um, don't take anybody at face value in this book. Really don't. The other thing I wanted to touch on too is you talked about, the night whatever. And again,
Nice
I'm drawing a
Landers.
yeah. I don't know why I can't ever remember their last name. Jane. I want to trade back what I said earlier. Take back. She definitely is one of the most evil characters I've read in a book.
Yeah,
But the scene where they tell Arthur, "Hey, you're gonna have to do this, or
yeah,
something's gonna happen to your mother."
yeah.
I don't know if you remember how they proved they were going to do this to or something to his mother, but it was just despicable and
Mhm.
something that as you sit there and if you think about like, what if somebody came up to you, somebody that you didn't really intend to interact with, they just happened chance did this, and they turn your life around. And like you said, it takes Arthur a little bit to realize, hey, it's not going to end once I get to this set money amount. Like it never ends with these people.
Yeah,
So that really, I think this book is kind of broke up into sections where, he's got the first, you know, dealing with, okay, how do we deal with these people, to how are we going to handle this, to, okay, we got to try to beat this. And I don't know if Jay can tell, but I am using my hands a lot. I'm pointing, I'm directing. I feel like I'm working air traffic over here just for Jay's sake.
you're like Ricky Bobby. Like I don't know what to do
I
with
don't
my
know what to do with
hands.
my hands. Hey, shake and bake, man. I wake up in the morning and I drink excellence. I don't know. I don't know if I can say the line that he says, but I'll go with that. But yeah, no, definitely a great book. I really think everybody will enjoy this. Another part that I don't think we really talked about, it kind of briefly touched on it, was Colin's grandpa
Yeah,
and just
Llewellyn.
how he came to have all this money.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie. I think he's the most interesting character, at least in this book. Again, just because of how he came up with this, and then just the life he's lived or supposed to live. I don't know. Um, Again, very interesting character that I wish had been in the book a little bit more. I would have loved to have heard some of his backstory a little bit more.
it's interesting you bring that up because I didn't know if I was going to talk about this, but I guess we'll go ahead and talk about this. So one of my recent Stephen King reads that I didn't like was Holly because King interjected a lot of his personal politics into it. This book, written by his son, talks about some controversial subjects. We have, he touches on this, and I didn't even pick up onto it, and probably halfway through the book. But Arthur Oakes is an African American, and you don't. It's not that it matters, but he touches on it so lightly that it actually stands out a little bit.
Oh yeah.
You have Allison, who's confused sexually. You have uh, Donna, who, yeah, is the same way. You have Llewellyn, who is the grandfather, kind of the father figure to Colin, who is gay. And even though those may or may not fit people's personal beliefs and whatnot, in outside of a fictional story, he wrote them in a way that didn't like put it in your face, like,
Oh yeah.
and it didn't detract from the story in one bit, but he was able to do that and still kind of solidify that, especially when he was time stamping things with, Saddam Hussein, bin Laden, 9/11, and then you have these orientation things and whatnot. It wasn't in your face to the point, but it still gave it kind of a concrete esque type that this is based on, 21st century society. And so I thought that was really interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, like you said, I mean, it on this platform, obviously, you have people who they delve into politics and their beliefs and this and that. And obviously, when you read a book, in my opinion, you're trying to escape that. And King, that's one thing I've heard about King, is he delves very, very much into his beliefs. And I've heard there are some books that he does tend to shove down your throat a little bit more than others. Again, not on here to necessarily delve into what's right, what's wrong, or anything like that by any means. But like you said, he touches on, I think, both sides of the
Yeah.
coin, if
Yeah.
you will. And I think if anybody really if he goes a little bit above and beyond more than any other characters, I think it's Donna. But
Yeah,
without spoiling that, as you read the book and it goes on, you kind of see why she's a little bit more frantic and just stuff, a little bit more out there regarding her personal beliefs versus others, which I'm not saying it justifies it or doesn't, but you do find out why she is that way. And I know I just saw Let's Bash King, and I assumed Dustin was on here for a second there. So Jay is throwing me off, definitely. But no,
he's
I really
trying.
think, and I'll give Mr. Hill his, a bow with that, because I was a little worried about that. Again, when I read a book, I don't really care to hear about politics or this and that. I just want to read it to enjoy the story. And I think Joe touched it just enough that you kind of got a little bit, but it, again, wasn't in your face, and it added a little bit more characterization to the characters, because you could kind of tell, okay, this character probably leans a little bit this way, but not enough that we're gonna delve into that. Just enough for you to kind of relate a little bit and know a little bit more about the characters.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think that's something he definitely does very well in this. And again, nothing against Stephen King by any means. In my mind right now, I'm also thinking about a time where I remember I saw a video that Dustin did where he was bashing on King, and somebody in the comments had commented, "I work at a coffee shop that he comes into," and King's response was, "What have you done?" So, Mr. King, if you see this, not bashing you by any means, but I think it would be nice for him to kind of take note of that in this again, and just maybe retract a little bit with the politics in his books. Again, I'm probably going to make some people mad by saying that, and I'll probably lose some subscribers, but I won't lose a week of sleep over it, as far as that goes. But yeah, like I said, Colin's grandpa is definitely a very interesting character,
Yeah,
as far as that goes, But yeah, definitely touched some great points in there as far as just the kind of the plot, and without giving anything overly spoily, if you will.
yeah. Hyde Reeves said, Jay is here. Time to wrap it up, fellers. Mr. King, I'm here to say you stink, sir.
We're gonna make the news this week. It's gonna be just 5 o'clock news. Stephen King freaks out over video that is contradicting. Comments down below. Mr. King, you stink. Guys hosting videos. You're great. Just change this a little bit.
Oh, man. Okay, so let's talk about likes and dislikes before we talk about Easter eggs and some of the other, how this book plays heavily into some multiverse of Stephen King. So, what do you think are maybe your top like from this book or top likes?
My top like, my in all honesty, aside from the fact that, well, two things. First thing was when I finished this tome, this doorstopper of a book, I wanted to go back and reread it. And the last time that I remember that happening in a book was when I read The Stand earlier this year.
Hmm.
So I think for that to be the same consensus with me, that I want to go back and reread it immediately after finishing it, I think that shows just how great this book is.
Yeah,
The other thing, and I've never had this happen, and you may have, but I never have. My favorite character in this book was also my least favorite character by the end of this book. Without going into spoiling anything, I will say it is a character within the core group, if you will.
I know who it is then.
And don't ask me why that is. As I go back, our main character obviously probably should be my favorite character, but just as the book unfolded, my favorite character was also my favorite and least favorite by the end of the book. So I think that was great for him to write a character that way, that I could really like them, but at the end of the book, despise them at the same time. Without, and again, try to spoil anything. Like I said, I really want people to read this book. What about yourself?
Well, I think you hit the. I mean, first and foremost, the characters I really enjoyed, and I think what you just said it definitely hits home. You have the characters that we at first really like, and then we don't like them, but we like the fact that we don't like them and why. I think there was character arcs that happened with the core six that happened. People die,
Oh yeah.
not just from like King Sorrow coming and doing what he does, but key people die in this book, and I've always kind of given Stephen King credit for that. Joe Hill obviously has taken a note from that, and I think it works really well in the story. It definitely makes you, it pulls at your heartstrings a little bit. Um, and I don't want to spoil. I'm not going to say who, but there's definitely some characters that I kind of enjoyed that ended up, not living throughout the story, and it's sad, but it works really well. The other thing that I really liked is I liked a lot of the Easter eggs. I really did. As a fan of the Dark Tower and some of Stephen King's works, I liked a lot of the Easter eggs. I liked hearing about Tolkien. I
Oh
liked
yeah.
that as well. And then I've always toted this as well. When it comes to Hill, he always does a good job of writing in bands, and because he's my age, a lot of the bands that he likes, I also listened to growing up. So there's this whole nostalgia thing that I really enjoy. And so I don't know if you caught or made notes on this, but he mentions the Misfits, the Ramones, the Bouncing Souls, which I didn't know, which was a punk rock band. He mentions Noel Gallagher from Oasis. He mentions Heart Shaped Box in reference to the Nirvana song, which I thought was interesting. And so I always liked how he does that. And he did that also in some of his other novels as well. And I just think it's really cool that he does that. And obviously I like it because it's bands that I listened growing up. So I thought that was really cool.
Oh yeah, I haven't listened. Sorry to cut you off. I haven't listened to some of those bands, but I'm not gonna lie. Within the last 2 years, the Misfits. There's a channel on here on YouTube called Planet CHH. He does all things horror movies. If you can't tell, I'm a huge horror movie fan, so stuff like this is right up my alley. But he had talked about the Misfits, and I actually the last 2 years I've really gotten into them, and I think they're awesome. I need to go check out those other bands, but yeah, when you mention the Misfits now, you definitely have my attention.
Yeah. Jay said, I'm calling in the trapper. Hope he gets my text in time. And Scott's like, people die in the book. Spoiler warning. We mentioned spoiler warning like 20 minutes ago. Like, you'll get here on time, Scoot. So let's talk about what was your least favorite or favorite parts.
And again, trying not to spoil anything. I almost, and again, not trying to jump ahead as far as the rating, but there were two parts at the beginning of this book that I didn't like. The first part was just how it all came together. After finishing the book, you know what? I can see why that kind of led to this, the cause and effect scenario. The part I didn't like, and again, there is a scene that is an adult theme scene, if you will, in this book that I didn't care for, which
Mm-hmm.
I think, some people are probably going to laugh because I just talked about reading the Gunsmith series, which that's what they're known for.
Yeah.
But, as I sit here and kind of, reflect on the book, just the whole arch of this book and the story and whatnot, those kind of seem smaller in my opinion. Now, my favorite part is also my least favorite part by all means, and that is when something happens in this that's kind of Game of Thrones esque, in my opinion, as far as the backstabbing. And yeah, that was caught me by surprise. What I will say is I was happy I was reading my book and not my Kindle because I wanted to throw this thing when I read that. I had to do a double take. I had to go back and read the page again because I couldn't believe it. But at the same time, I was like, okay, this stuff just got real in this book. Nobody is safe. This is not anything that I was expecting by any means. And how it came together as well. I just very thought out, very, very Stephen King-esque as far as just fleshing it out, not okay, we're gonna throw this in as a swerve. This isn't, and I'm not sure if people will get my reference. This is not Vince Russo back in the 90s, WCW, throw a swerve just to throw a swerve. This was thought out. It was great. It really was. It
Yeah.
sucked, but it was great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the whole like Stuart Finger, the troll scene like thing when they're in England looking for an answer. I thought that troll glamour thing was just a little weird and out there. I mean, it was interesting, but like that was probably the one part of the book that I was kind of like, I want to say I disliked it, but I was kind of like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Everything else I was just like I was bought in and was flying through and just enjoying the heck out of it. But
Oh
that's
yeah.
probably the one area I didn't like it. The the actual Game of Thrones, revenge or the stabbing in the back thing, I was waiting for something like that to happen in the story, because I was like, okay, how is this going to escalate to like we need to do something about this? I thought so that was interesting.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so okay, we talked about what we liked, what we disliked. Before we get into Easter eggs, we want to do a rating.
Sure. You go first.
So I rate out of a scale of 1 to 5. I'm going to say my rating of this is a 4.8.
Okay. Fair enough.
I really
fair
like it.
enough. Fair enough. I'll give you that. Well, real quick before I give you mine, I have to just know. Apparently, the Misfits gave this guy a harassment warning on YouTube.
Well,
So now
so
I need to know about that. Um, I try, and I've really been trying to be harder on my rating system because I feel like 5-star books get thrown out here and there.
yeah,
I'll give you this. I will go 4.8, 4.9. And again, it's just because of those two little nitpicks that kind of threw me off at the beginning of the book. But
yeah,
I think this is as close as a 5-star rating as you can get without it actually being a 5-star rating, in my opinion. Again, as time goes on and I kind of reflect on this and the two kind of minor things I had issues with, I think there's possibility of it going up. Real quick, because it just popped in my head. Robin in this book. We didn't give Robin any credit as far as that goes. It just popped in my head. So that's another
yeah.
character that you'll come across without going into any detail. Again, I think this might be the closest kind of going back that Hill gets as far as kind of just maybe pushing the boundary what some people agree with or don't agree with, and I'll leave it at that. But like I said, I would probably give this 4.8, 4.9 in all honesty.
Yeah.
This is, like I said, this is a book I really honestly see myself going back and rereading later on down the line. Once I've read, The Fireman, and I want to go back and reread some of his other works first, as far as that goes.
Yeah, so Scott, some other character, the Bouncing Souls wear Adidas, and the Misfits got me a harassment warning on YouTube. So Scott just loves to ride the fence on the harassment and demonetization stuff that he does on YouTube. I mean, he's the one that created our intro for Book Bros, and then every time you play it, you can't do anything with the video because YouTube hates it. I mean, he really likes to ride the fence on if YouTube's going to like this or not.
I'll give I'll give Scott, and I'm also going to shout out Rowdy Player One as well. As I've got some up and coming favorite channels. Those two definitely take the cake. I really enjoy watching their videos. So Scott and Rowdy Player One definitely are two that I think at this point they definitely are in the group as far as some of my favorite people on here reviewing books. But yeah. I've not seen the Hellboy movies. I'm not gonna lie. I need to watch them.
Troll Glamour sounds like lifted from Hellboy movies. Yeah, I mean, I can understand. I've seen the movies. Yeah, yeah. I swear, Jay's favorite color is green. He is such an envious. We're doing our live stream, Jay. You can have your buddy back here just shortly. Okay, calm down.
You know what? I'm not gonna lie. Between reading, and that was the thing, was trying to decide between reading Harvath and King Sorrow. That was hard.
I can't help it that
where's
people say
Hyman?
yes.
We need him in here to ring us all in.
Oh man.
Which, speaking, I told Kevin before we started this thing, Jay, when are we gonna finish the wagon train? There's like 3 people that have finished it. The rest of us are either stuck on the road dead or we died of dysentery, like in the Oregon Trail game.
Yeah.
Or a wagon fell in the river. I don't know at this point, but we got to get on that.
Did Jay even read a book past Jubal Sackett? I mean,
I think he was on like book 9. I think he might have been on like book 9.
I think I loved Pisano. I think Jay didn't like the Buffalo, and so he stopped reading the books.
Is y'all's Book Bros as crazy as this? Because I need to tune in for the entire thing if that's the case.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah.
I can only imagine the banter.
I have one recorded.
Which one is it? I'm curious now.
As soon as the Wheel of Time is finished, I'd read.
I can't laugh about that. I jumped off that one. I jumped off that train, unfortunately. I left poor Bing and Dustin to themselves on that Mojave one. Mojave Crossing, I think, is what it was called, or something like that.
Yeah.
That might be book 4. Now I think about it.
So let's get this back on track so we're not here for 2 hours because of Jay. Okay, so we've given a rating, we've given our likes or dislikes. Let's talk about some of the Easter eggs because I think they're definitely worth talking about. So, okay, there's a lot. I know, Austyn, you talked earlier about, okay, I've read some Stephen King's. You haven't read The Dark Tower.
I have not. No, I
Okay,
actually, yeah, no.
so let's talk through some of these here, and you feel free to chime in when you catch one of these. Oh, okay. So here's my list. So there's the library. So at the college is Brooks Library. So Brooks is one of
This
the gentlemen.
Shawshank,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I
So
got that one. Yep.
he worked with Andy Dufresne at the library for in the show and Rita Hayworth in the Shawshank Redemption. Yep. You have Gwen wearing a blue chambray shirt. So that is whenever you hear a story that mentions a blue chambray shirt, that is a mention to the Dark Tower.
Okay.
So, and
Okay.
that's it's a little Easter egg that's planted in a lot of King books. So that's mentioned in here. The psychology research part of the government was Division 19, which is anything that's 19 is a reference to the Dark Tower.
I really need to read The Dark Tower now because I hear 19, I see it all the time with Stephen King,
Yeah,
and I need to know at this point
yeah,
because it goes over my head. I think I don't know if I told you I got Insomnia on the way. I know that was one you said had to have been read before
yeah,
reading The Dark Tower, so I got that on the way, so I could try to read that at least and be a little prepared for it.
yeah. There's Flight or Fright is mentioned. That is actually a collection that I actually own, but it's actually a collection of short stories that Stephen King kind of was one of the editors or,
Okay.
and so that is mentioned in the story. But yeah, that's an interesting kind of homage. There is a Dark Tower echo here. There is a basically, I mean, it basically rips off book one, the first line of the Gunslinger. So there's the part where they're doing the calling of King Sorrow. So they're doing this thing, and Arthur is outside chasing the crane guy. He is the guy, and so at what Hill writes is the dark man fled across the snow and Arthur Oakes followed, which is a absolute plagiarized. If you look up the Gunslinger, the first sentence is the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed.
Yeah, I've read. I think like the first chapter or whatever in the Gunslinger. But even I feel like if you're somebody who's a King fan for a while, I feel like everybody throws that term around. So that
Yeah,
recognized, I definitely recognized that. Kind of
yeah,
jumped out of my seat, like, hey, I found one. I
yeah,
realized what this was referencing.
yeah. There's another one. It mentions John Rothstein, which is a fictional author from Stephen King's universe. It was one of the rare books that Arthur steals. The book is titled "The Runner" by John Rothstein, which is an Easter egg because John Rothstein was the reclusive author that is in the second book in the Mister Mercedes trilogy, Finders Keepers.
Okay. I need to
Okay.
read those books as well.
Okay.
But
Yeah. Um, Mordred is mentioned in this book as a reference to King Arthur, but Mordred is the child, one of the Man in Black's children, the Crimson King's kid in the Dark Tower series.
okay.
The shop, which I know that is mentioned. It's the whole kind of intelligence outfit that's referenced. It's pretty much how at one section in this story, this whole kind of thing goes where the McBrides are in this government facility getting questioned and whatnot, and so that was heavily influenced from Firestarter.
Okay.
King Sorrow. So for those of you still here, King Sorrow, when he is given a name as tribute, so to speak, when the six give him a name, he goes after someone. And he doesn't just go after them and kill them immediately. He likes to build up the suspense because he likes to eat their fear, which is heavily the same exact thing that Pennywise does in It. He likes the fear of the children before he devours them.
Wow. I will say real quick, and this is kind of a side reference, and I might end up. I'll have to send you this book if I come across it. I'm sending it to you for you to read, because it looks like Scott, I think you said what his name was, um, asked if this is in the King universe. If you read Nosferatu, he references Pennywise in there. So
Yep.
I definitely would say this is definitely in the vein of the King universe. And real quick, now I'm thinking about it. After I finished Firestarter, I was really hoping, because I know he has the book, The Institute. And I don't know if that is related to the shop or anything like that. If that's not, I was wanting a follow up to Firestarter that had the shop. If this is the only follow up we get, I'm content with it. I'm not gonna lie, as
The
far as
Ins-
that goes.
the Institute's story is different than Firestarter. There's children with abilities,
Okay. Is
but
the shop in it at all?
the it I wouldn't say exactly, but
Okay.
the place that these kids are housed feels like it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if you liked that element of Firestarter, you will like the Institute.
I'll have to read it. And
Yeah.
I'm definitely January 1st. I'll have to order the books and I'll be joining you guys because why not?
Does Joe Hill's books actually take place in the King universe or just obliquely reference King's work? So that's a great question. I think you could theorize and argue that the King Sorrow, the long dark, which he comes from and resides when he's not in our plane of existence, is midworld, is the Prim, is part of the Dark Tower metaverse. And so my assumption, my theory here is that I think Joe Hill will help kind of write in some of his own stories, but they will cross over into the Dark Tower to kind of take the torch from his dad, as his dad's stories outside of the key Dark Tower books continue to reference and have Easter eggs into the Dark Tower because King's universe is a multiverse. So I think Joe Hill will probably can carry that torch as he continues to put out books.
This is definitely, yeah, it's definitely getting to the point of like Avengers,
Yeah.
Marvel, stuff like that by all means, which
Yeah.
is great because if you're somebody like me who hasn't read a whole lot of King, if you read them in the publication order, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, is the way to go because you can get all these little references. But I mean, King's got well over, I don't know how many books he's got at this point, but if you tack in, Hill's books at this point, I mean, it's got to be upwards of probably hitting what, 70, 80 books
Well,
maybe.
King's got over 70. And
Yeah. So,
so,
I mean,
yeah.
it's definitely something like this, even if, at least in my opinion, even if it's kind of a derivative of the multiverse or what have you. You know what? I think he does it just enough that you get the nod, like, hey, this is part of this. It's not necessarily stealing it, but even if he did, I can't imagine his dad's going to tell him no, you can't. I mean, it seems like his dad at this point is one of his unofficial editors. So I almost wonder if King himself says, hey, change this to this, and you can kind of tie this into
Yeah.
the multiverse. I wouldn't be surprised if he does that, which
Yeah.
again, it's just speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised because, like you said, he definitely rips a line from the gunslinger for sure.
Mhm. Sure. So there's other Easter eggs as well. There is an Easter egg that's for the Dead Zone. They talk about when they're mentioning, who's up next on the chopping block for Easter. They're mentioned there's a substitute teacher with a history of mental illness attempted to assassinate Senator candidate Greg Stilson. The shooter was John Smith, supposedly suffered from a gift of prophecy. He suffered from a brain tumor, which is the Dead Zone.
Oh yeah.
They mentioned there's a deft character named Nick in the story in King Sorrow, that's Nick Andros from The Stand.
Oh yeah.
There's Dorrance Marsteller is mentioned in passing in the story, and he is a character from Insomnia. Stuart Finger, the troll, he has a line in the section that I wasn't a huge fan of, but it definitely stood out because he mentions and he says, I believe it's quote, "It's too late to turn back now, which is kind of an homage to Judd Crandall in Pet Cemetery when he says sometimes dead is better.
Oh yeah.
There's also too, there's again, not outside of, the Dark Tower stuff, there's heavily influences and nods to Tolkien. We had the glamour of the trolls, the riddling, which you could attribute to Smaug, or you could attribute to Blaine the Mono from the Dark Tower. You have Arthur and Gwyn, so you have Arthurian legends type stuff, as well. But yeah, it's heavily, Easter egged throughout, and that's just some of them. I'm sure there's a lot of others you could probably speculate as well, as a lot of people do, but those are the ones I wrote down. So, yeah, we answered that question. So we talked about what we liked. We talked about our ratings. Those are the Easter eggs. Any final thoughts you have, Austyn?
Well, yeah, I want to comment that Jay put the Dark Tower sucks, so now he's got some explaining to do after this. No, I've said it quite a few times. Um, this book really, it is a great book, And again, I think Kevin, you'd agree when you say definitely one would recommend picking up. What I will say is, the last couple years, I've really wanted to get into reading Stephen King works and this and that. But if what you said is, accurate and Joe is really going to try and write a book a year from now on for, the next however many years, he's up there. He's up there with the king as far as just automatic buy. Doesn't matter what it is, he's going to be an automatic buy for me. And I think, if you're somebody who's not sure where to start with Joe Hill's stuff, I think any of them, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, obviously starting at the beginning, you kind of see gradually as his writing style grows and whatnot. But I think any of his books, again, outside of and I'm drawing a blank.
The Fireman?
The Fireman. I almost said the Firestarter. The Firemen are great starting points. As far as that goes, again, I think this is a book that anybody can and will enjoy, in all honesty. Again, I look forward to hearing what everybody thinks on this. Look forward to, again, just jumping into any of his other works, because I need to read his short story collections now, because I know you did a Saturday short on one of his, didn't you, one time? And I remember watching it, but I don't remember what it was about. So I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that video and help you with the views on that, but also pick up the book myself and read it.
Yeah, I don't ask Scott to help me because he would demonetize everything, with his, he just can't help himself with some of the Pee Wee Herman stuff, and yeah, but I think I agree with you. I think Bill is definitely an interesting author, definitely one that I'm always interested in buying. I think this is probably one of his best works, in my opinion. I liked Heart Shaped Box a lot. It was the first one I read, but this is definitely one of his best, for sure. What's next for you in terms of reading our outer world media?
Oh man, that's a great question. Like I was telling you, I got a 7-month old at home, so my reading is a lot more. I won't say pickier, but I am definitely, if it's a book I'm not enjoying, I'm kind of setting it down. Like I said, I talked with my wife the other day, and I told my wife by the time my kid turns 18, I want to have read all of King's works. That is a bucket list item for me, so that's going to be what I'm really focusing on. Probably from here on out, in all honesty, the channel is just kind of, when I get a review out, I will. I really have never been one to enjoy really, really long books, which is kind of ironic being a Stephen King fan. But I want to pick up some Ken Follett, books, stuff like that. I know you said Pillars of the Earth was great, so I have a copy of that. I want to read that. Looks like I'll probably be hopping on this read or buddy read, fellowship read, whatever you want to call it, of the Dark Tower. As far as demonetization, I don't care. The channel's not going anywhere. I'm not going to make any money on it at any point in time. That's not my goal. So if I lose a video or two, it is what it is. But yeah, gonna continue on with the Harvath series with Jay whenever we get the chance. I know he's got y'all's Book Bros coming up, which I'm not gonna lie, I'm very, very much looking forward to. I've
See,
become a fan now.
he tells you one thing, Austin. He tells you like, oh, you gotta put Kevin's read ahead of mine. He has other things that he's getting invited to. He makes it sound like no one likes him. Woe is me.
I think one of these days we're gonna have to, and at some point, I'm gonna throw this out there for whoever's on here who has channels. I think at some point in time we just have to do a let's chit chat or whatever. We get about 6 of us on here. We get you, we'll get Rowdy, we'll get Jay, we'll get Hyde and Reed, we'll get Scott. Let's get a bunch of us on there and just see where the banner takes us, because I feel like, boy, we're at an hour and 15 minutes. I feel like this has been about a 20-minute conversation. I can't imagine how it would go with about 6 or 7 of us on there just bantering back and forth. I think Scott and Rowdy could sit back and watch what it was like in the group chat during the wagon train, because
Yeah,
it's starting to come back to me. The PTSD of it all is coming back now.
yeah. I honestly think like that wagon train was something. I mean, maybe our fearless leader was on here earlier. I don't did Hyde and Reed make it all the way through?
I think he was working on last it's been a little bit since I've talked with him. I check in with him and he checks in with me from time to time, and he was saying that he was still working on it a little bit. Um,
That's a good one, Bing.
I like it. Yeah, but yeah, no, I think he was still working on it. But yeah, that's just kind of what's up for the channel. I mean, I forgot to tell you, congrats, your channel, and I've told you this before. If there was anybody whose channel deserved to grow for such a great person on here, with just your personality, it's definitely you. But yeah, no, I'm kind of taking the approach of, just whenever I get a review out, I can and I will. Again, just gonna be a little bit more pickier with what I'm reading. Again, I just enjoy getting to talk with you, Jay, Nick at Hyde and Reed, which it looks like he's on here, which is great. I need to check in with him more often, as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Dustin Neely, I haven't talked with him in a little while since I kind of hopped off the Wheel of Time read along. But yeah, like I said, that's really what I got coming up, is just kind of focusing on whatever I'm in the mood to read. What about you? I'm sure your channel is going to continue to grow with Saturday shorts and reviews. And I know you love your top 10 videos. I know that for a fact, because Jay was telling me about that, how you two love your top 10 videos.
Oh man. I do have a plan to do a couple top videos. Obviously with the year end, I like to do my top books of the year, top short stories of the year. But yeah, they're so done everywhere,
If
you
this book
know.
isn't on your top 10 of the year, then I think we're
Oh,
going to
it will
have to.
be.
I'm about to say, because I think what we read, was it Flint? That was our first buddy read, and that was great. That we both
Yeah.
really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So I think between you and Jay, I'm 2 for 2 for the books as far as that goes. But
Yeah.
well, hopefully next year, about once a month, we'll get a top 10. People I don't like on YouTube. I can't imagine where Jay's going to fall on there, or Scott for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, depending on if they Venmo me some money, it might affect where they bounce out on the list.
1990. Why can't you round it up to 20, Jay?
It sounds better if it's less than 20. He left this live feed faster than he did the wagon train. Was that? Is he saying that about Hyde and Reed? That's
I have
funny.
no idea, in all honesty, on this one. I don't know, but
Hyde and Reed said he's at Treasure Mountain.
that
So
was a good one. I like that one.
yeah,
There was a little bit of a dip in the series, but I think Treasure Mountain kind of picked it back up.
I liked I liked Orlando. I liked that one because it was a boxing story. I like
Oh,
that.
Lando was great.
Yeah, and then I liked all the Tell ones. I like Tell Sackett a lot.
Again,
You know,
yeah,
his Lamore writes boxing really well. Like,
he does. He
you
does.
know,
It's great. His action scenes are just top notch. Even
for sure.
boxing, not even boxing, just a barroom fight, just top notch. I mean, he
Yeah,
doesn't take 20 pages to describe it. He just short, sweet, to the point, and you get it.
yeah,
There's no uh, dancing around it as far as that goes.
yeah, for sure. Reading wise, I've been reading a lot of westerns from Robert B. Parker, the Virgil Cole Everett Hitch series. I've been flying through those books. even the ones that are written after his passing. I've been liking those. I've been reading through those. I've actually been picking up a few at the library and reading those, and then I'm trying to read a couple nonfiction books, but those just take forever for me. And so,
They, yeah, the nonfiction, especially some of them get up there. I had the Mark Twain, Ron Chernow that I picked up brand new when it came out, and I didn't realize that 1,600 pages in a nonfiction book can definitely take a little while.
oh
The
yeah,
only thing I forgot to include, Jay's turned me on to the Reacher series. So I'm going to start that series here soon, I believe. I think he's sending me a few copies, so I'll
yeah.
be trying to catch up with y'all with the Reacher series.
Yeah, the 30th book just came out, or it's no, it's yeah, I think it just came out. I think it came out on Veterans Day. And so, but those, I will tell you, after when Lee Child brought his brother Andrew Child into the mix to start helping write those and basically is retiring. His brother Andrew Child, the voice of Reacher, is a little different. It's hit and miss on him.
Really?
Some of them I liked, some of them I no, I haven't liked. So
Okay.
the newest one is titled Exit Strategy. It's number 30 in the series. It just came out. I'll probably read it next year. But yeah, it's hit or miss. The early ones are fantastic. You know, the first, you can't go wrong with like the first 15. They're really good.
Well, that's good. Well, if you're looking for nonfiction, I read this last year. I know The Professor and the Madman. It's kind of short, sweet, to the point. I think you might like it. It's a little out there about the making of the Oxford English Dictionary, and
Mhm.
just look again, a little out there, but the background history, it kind of very interesting.
Yeah. Cool. So, anything else? We call this a done deal.
No, just again, pick it up as usual, Kevin. Great talking with you, man. I appreciate it. And again, look forward to videos that you have coming out and whatnot, and just chit chatting with you. Now that I have your phone number, I have to talk to you periodically and whatnot.
I'm sure you'll be more respectful than some of the other people that text me. Jay. But anyways, yeah, it was a lot of fun. Guys on the chat, if you're still here, if you have not read King Sorrow, you definitely should. I think it's well worth your time, regardless if you don't like horror or fantasy. I think it has a nice blend of everything. It's definitely a fast paced, one of the fastest paced 900 page books I've read in a while.
Oh
So
yeah.
thanks for stopping by, Austyn. It's great having you. And
Oh,
I want to say thank you. It was a fun buddy read, and I enjoyed this.
oh, thank you, man. Thank you for having me. Thank you for reading with me. I know it's been almost about a year that we've been waiting on this to come out. So
For
again,
sure.
thank you, man. Look forward to talking with you later on down the road. Look forward to next live stream that you're on. I'm definitely tuning in for the whole thing, and I'm just gonna bombard y'all with all kinds of whatever stuff that Jay's throwing out there right now. So
All right. Sounds good. And everyone on the stream, I appreciate you stopping by, and I hope you have a great one. We'll talk to
have
you
a
all
good
later.
one.
See you.